Hello, everybody. My name is David Goddard, and I'm DoubleVerify's Senior Director of Business Development, responsible for expanding partnerships with digital media and technology companies. I'm also the chair of IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee, a multi-stakeholder group which aims to increase the understanding of programmatic ecosystem, the impact it's having on digital advertising, and influence the industry via initiatives. As most of you will know, IAB Europe is a European-level association for digital marketing and advertising ecosystem. Through its membership of national IABs and media technology and marketing companies, its mission is to lead political representation and promote industry collaboration across Europe. One of the ways we do this is by bringing people together through virtual events. One such initiative is the IAB Europe's Virtual Programmatic Day, which I want to thank you all for joining. I also want to highlight that IAB Europe and myself are very grateful to our sponsors for this event, MoPub and OneTrust Preference Choice, who have helped make this event possible. We can confidently say that Virtual Programmatic Day is one of the largest virtual events in not just the programmatic industry, but the digital advertising industry. And unlike many other virtual events, this is not pre-recorded. We are live. So thank you so much all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We'll make sure that we reward you with this fantastic event. So today we have a stellar lineup of moderators and panelists in 5 sessions to discuss the programmatic landscape in Europe, what programmatic advertising will look like beyond third-party cookies, the TCF v2, SSP or sell-side platform data best practices, and creativity in programmatic. All of the speakers you will be hearing from today are members of IAB Europe. We are very fortunate to have the very best leaders in our industry to take part in our events and join on initiatives. If you would like more information about how you can get involved in future events, please contact Helen or Charlie. We'll show their contact details later on. But before we kick off, we'd love to know who is joining us from across Europe and beyond. So please let us know what stakeholder group you belong in by taking part in our poll. And hopefully, as if by magic, it should be appearing on your screen now. Whilst you complete the poll, I also want to highlight we want to encourage audience participation throughout the event. So during each panel or following each panel, there will be an audience Q&A. So if you have questions for today's panelists, you will be pleased to know that you can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window during the panel. In addition to the poll you just completed, we will also be launching a few audience polls to ascertain your opinion on specific topics throughout the event today. So thank you all in advance for your participation in today's Virtual Programmatic Day. And it's H2 Virtual, the second of the year. So thank you again for completing the poll, and the results should be in, and I'm hoping they'll appear on my screen shortly. Look at that, as if by magic again. So fantastic. 11% advertisers, agencies, 18%, ad tech, 38%, publishers, 29%, media and press, 1%, hello media and press, and other, as always, 4%. Thank you very much. So now on to our first session. This will be a keynote presentation from Daniel Knapp, Chief Economist of IAB Europe, and myself, yes, you can't get rid of me, on the European programmatic landscape, where we'll also share the results of Attitudes Towards Programmatic Survey and Programmatic Ad Spend Report. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, David, and a warm welcome from me as well. I'm the Chief Economist at IAB Europe, and my job is really to try to quantify the size of the ad market and anticipate where it's going. And in my work, of course, programmatic is a key component of that because it has been a driver of digital advertising and a structural transformation factor within digital advertising for the last years. We talk a lot about programmatic, but there's a paradox here. Programmatic is data-driven, but it's probably the part of the industry that is most difficult to size because there are so many different definitions, perspectives on programmatic. Do we include social? Do we exclude it? Do we just focus on the OpenRTB protocol? Many different questions. And if we expand that to Europe, to an EU 27 or even beyond, it gets incredibly complex. So while there are many charts out there, and you've got the typical bottom left to upper right charts showing a lot of growth, we thought at IAB Europe we need to do something different. We have a long history in doing our ADX benchmark study, which really takes the expertise of the local IABs and harmonizes data to provide a robust foundation of the size of the market. And something similar we have undertaken in programmatic for a couple of years. And I'm pleased to show you today what our latest figures are. They go up to 2019, so we don't have 2020 included, but I'll make a few remarks on the recovery in 2020 at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So what is our programmatic market sizing study? I already alluded to it. It's the reference, the compass of programmatic advertising sizing in Europe. We take data from the local IABs, we harmonize definitions, we consolidate things. We look at data from DSPs and SSPs to provide a comprehensive picture, both the things that are going through agencies as well as the long tail, to understand the true size of programmatic across all markets covered here. It's an extension of our programmatic benchmark reports. Key thing is definitions vary, and we are including in this wider view here social as well, but we have as well, of course, a breakout available with figures excluding social so that the figures are relevant for everybody in the industry. Next slide, please. So how big is programmatic today? First thing we can see, it really moved since 2013, it really increased tenfold in just a couple of years' time, where it was an afterthought initially, very much hype, but practically speaking, an afterthought in media buying, a minuscule proportion of digital ad spend. We've seen continuous growth throughout the last years, and now we've got a market size of 23 billion euros. Let's contextualize that. That is as much as the entire GDP of Iceland. So it is a sizable number, and programmatic today is far from an afterthought. It's now the default where digital advertising is being transacted. It's the default infrastructure for digital advertising. Next slide, please. And we can see this if we turn back the clocks and look at the shares. We can see much more clearly how these big figures translate into the conquest of programmatic, if you will, where 2013 you can see 20% of digital ad spend programmatic, and now it is really the default. So we talk about digital becoming an increasingly unnecessary prefix, but as everything moves digital, but I think the same applies to programmatic, where increasingly the infrastructure of supply meeting demand, where creative is built on top of smart algorithms, is becoming the default transaction mechanism for digital advertising. In the study here, our focus is really on display and video, but there are, of course, increasingly other formats, digital out of home, connected TV, audio, and so forth, whose future is being built on a programmatic infrastructure. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at the evolution of digital advertising, which has, despite lots of structural changes in the market, continued to grow double-digit over the last couple of years, if we zoom in into the display component, we can see a changing of guards. We can see that if we look at the classic display stuff, it was very minuscule, below inflation growth since 2014. And then actually we've seen a consecutive decline that was accelerating over time, just until 2019, when a kind of new non-programmatic, new vertical video formats, Snap and TikTok, came into play. But you can see the growth driver, the infrastructure fueling display was really programmatic, which you can see has been growing at a high double-digit percentage year over year. Next slide. This doesn't just apply to display. We are beyond the point of talking about programmatic as just the long tail, but it's, I think, important to stress it again by looking at how important programmatic is for something that has always been kind of sacrosanct for broadcasters, for others, video, the priced inventory, branding inventory. And we can really see how programmatic now really has moved up the funnel and underpins brand advertising, as well as performance video and other new video categories, where it's already more than 50% of all video spent in Europe. Next slide. While in this study, we do not go into the details of by country breakouts. We have those available if you want to shoot me an email afterwards. In this presentation, just a quick aggregation, we can see programmatic was driven by some early adopter markets in Europe. It's driven by the UK, the Netherlands, France, Germany, and others. But remarkably, what we're seeing now is a much faster adoption of programmatic in Eastern European markets, where there are some markets that have a second mover advantage. Many of the pain points in the ecosystem, about transparency and control, about how to design a header bidding setup and other very complex things that had to grow organically, often through trial and error. As these have been resolved, it's much easier to transpose winning formulas of programmatic onto other markets. So we can see an expansion of the share of total Europe within Central and Eastern Europe in particular in the next coming years. A very brief outlook before I conclude. 2020 has been an incredibly challenging year for the entire industry, but we do not have the figures yet. We believe that indications from Q3 and now Q4 tell us that programmatic will continue to grow in 2020. My first estimate is at around about 5 to 6% year on year for the entirety of Europe. Thank you very much for the attention, and I pass back to David, who's going to contextualize these numbers with how traders and buyers and sellers really think about programmatic.
Thank you very much, Daniel. For those who missed my intro to the Virtual Programmatic Day moments ago, hello again. My name is David Goddard and I'm the Senior Director of Business Development at DoubleVerify and IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee. We're now going to look at the factors that have contributed to the numbers Daniel presented by reviewing our attitudes to programmatic advertising study, which was released at the end of September and available on IAB Europe's website. In the next few slides, I will share some of the top findings from the research. We looked at the benefits and challenges of programmatic trading, the operational models and strategies for programmatic trading, the measurement of programmatic campaigns, and the future of programmatic advertising investment. Now in its 6th year, the attitudes to programmatic study has become an industry benchmark to show how programmatic advertising attitudes, adoption, and strategies are evolving. The survey attracted respondents who commanded significant volumes of advertising supply and demand. The responses came from advertisers, agencies, publishers, and ad tech vendors from 31 markets, and respondents with both pan-European and global remits. In our first question to respondents, we asked them, what are the key drivers for your company to consider investing in or increasing its programmatic trading investment? Among advertisers, better use of data was the number one reason. Since last year, it has become much more impactful, jumping from 69% in 2019 to 80% in 2020. Whereas for those at agencies, the majority are cited targeting efficiencies is their number one driver. Furthering the importance and awareness of supply path optimization this year, control of media and inventory has become more important to buy-side decision-making in 2020. Advertisers who want to access media at a lower cost, advertisers also wanted to access media at a lower cost, while agencies want access to premium inventory. More agencies are now driven by the ability to gain access to premium inventory at scale. This is 43% in 2020 compared to 36% in 2019. Looking at the sell side, we saw nearly half of publishers, 48%, cite data is driving their programmatic investment and strategy, a 10% or 10% percentage point increase over last year. However, in 2020, trading and opportunities are more important to publishers than ever before, and it now ranks alongside data as the key drivers for publishers to invest in programmatic. Looking at the barriers to programmatic adoption, it's not surprising that supply chain transparency ranks as a primary concern for advertisers. For greater control of inventory and at a lower cost, they are demanding transparency and clarity around technology fees from their partners. We've also seen publishers increase their focus on demand path optimization this year driven by an opaque supply. Publishers want to know how their supply is being offered to competitors. It is encouraging to see there's been a significant drop in brand safety reported by advertisers and publishers. However, there still remains the same level of concern for agencies. This is to be expected with their role in continuing to raise awareness to all parties to ensure brand safe environments for their clients. Now, the in-housing trend appears to be old news, as advertisers with in-house model have decreased from 38% in 2019 to 20% in 2020. This has the number of, as has the number of agencies with an in-house trading desk. Now the buy side continues to evolve. towards hybrid models. The percentage of advertisers stating that they have a hybrid model for programmatic trading has doubled to 30% in 2020. So 35% of agencies stated that they had a hybrid model for programmatic trading. Over the past few years, we have been assessing the impact that consultancies are having on programmatic adoption. Industry stakeholders appear to see the value, as all advertisers that responded and a third of publishers are considering using an external consultancy. The study also looked into the human impact on programmatic. For years, there's been a battle to employ the right people, and talent remained the top barrier to programmatic investment. However, this has changed in 2020. Half the number of publishers report hiring people with the right skill set as a barrier to programmatic compared to 2019. But twice as many from both buy-side groups are concerned with talent acquisition, but it still saw a drop. And again, on the ad tech side, with only 1 in 3 of the ad tech side consider talent acquisition a leading barrier, which again is a small drop from last year. We do need to bear in mind this research was in the field at the height of the pandemic. The study shows that there was an overall drop in talent acquisition being a barrier. This may have been down to companies downsizing their teams or pausing their recruitment rather than an increased talent pool. And in a very uncertain year, it's not a surprise that COVID may have had an impact on the results of this study. I'm now delighted to say IAB Europe has brought together a panel of industry leaders and experts from the Programmatic Trading Committee to explore the state of programmatic advertising landscape and discuss the results from both Daniel's report and the attitudes towards programmatic study. I'd like to invite my panelists now to introduce themselves and answer the first question. The study showed an increase in advertisers investing more than 41% of display inventory via programmatic methods. What do we think are the main reasons? The depletion of the third-party cookie, bearing in mind that this data continues to be, data continues to be the #1 reason for programmatic investment. So I'd like to come to Danny first to introduce yourselves and answer that question. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me all right, David?
I can hear you now, sir.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that.
No worries at all.
Yeah, so I think just in general, we've got pretty good at programmatic activation at this stage. You've seen the numbers and the scale that we're now talking about. I don't think we could say that we've necessarily delivered on the promise of programmatic, but we've made a pretty good amount of headway, especially in the last couple of years. The material change for me is mainly in marketers being more educated about their understanding of their own first-party data. If we sat there a couple of years ago, we probably would be having a conversation about how you organize first-party data as opposed to how you find your audience. So I think that's the big step change that we've seen. And potentially that's to the detriment of third-party data, where I think some advertisers have probably seen the value of that decline as they've seen the value of their own first-party go up. It is the only asset that's completely unique to them, and therefore it's probably the most differentiated piece of information and data that they could utilize in their campaigns. As the market moves on, there's more progression in channels that become addressable. Again, 3-4 years ago, we'd probably be having mainly a display conversation. There's literally no channel that isn't addressable at this stage, and that changes by market, as I'm sure we'll talk about today. But the market's moved significantly forward from where we were.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Emily, if you'd like to introduce yourself and answer that first question.
Hello, I'm Emily Roberts, and I look after programmatic sales across Europe, Middle East and Africa for BBC Global News. And I think looking at the attitudes to programmatic study, the fact that we're in a pandemic has actually, I think, really accelerated the growth of programmatic. We're seeing people kind of trying to test budgets and not really wanting to put a large amount up front in this year, which is completely understandable. And programmatic's a perfect way of kind of testing those budgets, but not only kind of testing, but getting an ROI and a proven ROI. Like there's no other channel where you can genuinely look at right from the start of your marketing right to the end and kind of understand last click. So I think that's massively accelerated it. But on the other hand, like we have a long way to go. Programmatic's over 10 years old now. And there's still a large amount kind of being booked as direct IOs. And we're definitely seeing that at the BBC. And so, yeah, we still have a way to go, even though it's on the increase, which is great.
Thank you, Emily. Edward.
Hi, everyone. Ed Whale, MD for EMEA at SpotX. Thanks very much for having me. I think, you know, some of the guys have commented on some of the key drivers. For me, it's the arrival of more premium inventory into the programmatic ecosystem, and perhaps also the growth of execution methods that lend themselves more to the direct style of trading, like programmatic guaranteed. We'll probably come on to also the kind of increased trust, I think, that we've been working on building in programmatic as a key driver. I was actually really interested by Daniel's stat just now, saying that despite everything that's gone on this year, programmatic's likely to continue its growth path. And that's really interesting. I think that, you know, the circumstances we found ourselves in placed a lot of brands in a period of reactivity. And programmatic's a channel that lends itself to, you know, quick and flexible optimization. So it's interesting to see that that's also contributed to growth.
Thank you, Ed. Danny. Oh no, sorry, we've already done Danny. I'll say Nicola. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicola Bevan, the Managing Director for Operations at Xaxis EMEA. I'm really happy to be here today and speaking to you all. So I think for me, I continue to expect programmatic to grow and agree with everything that everybody said so far. I think the depletion of the third-party cookie presents us all with new challenges. I agree with what Daniel said at the beginning. I think first-party data will become central to advertiser data strategies. But I think it's really important to remember that on our programmatic journey, programmatic has always been really innovative. We continue to see new channels coming and growing, and the technology getting better and better. And it will continue to offer advertisers new opportunities to reach their consumers. And I think it kind of just echoing what Emily said as well, the control and flexibility that programmatic brings, it's kind of second to none in my opinion. And it really does help people to create test and learn frameworks and find out what really can grow their business.
Thank you, Nicola. Vincent.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vincent Tessia. I look for Mopub's brand and agency relationships across Europe. Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me. So really, for me, the future of all media is digital, right? We're still seeing and witnessing the shift. And digital is programmatic. We've just seen, you know, the result of the study, like 77% last year of digital was transacted programmatically. So for me, whatever headwinds we are seeing, and we've seen a lot this year, it's not going to stop programmatic as a media activation channel. So that's really, for me, the really big trend I'm seeing. It's not going to stop. And yeah, sure, cookie deprecation, making it a little bit more difficult to leverage the targeting benefits of programmatic. There's so much more benefits around automation that programmatic brings to the table. So for me, that's really a testament to the strength and the value that programmatic brings. So that's for me the main reason. And the other is, obviously we're seeing all those new channels that are growing. And so I'm thinking about audio, out of home, mobile as well. Brands are really embracing mobile in-app. So that's all adding up into this big trend that we're seeing, that programmatic is still in a massive adoption trend.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Now on to the next question. So a couple of years ago, when we launched Virtual Programmatic Day, the Attitudes Towards Programmatic Survey at Demexco, and when I say at Demexco, that feels strange with the current situation this year. All the headlines which were picked up from the study was all about in-housing and how advertisers were moving to in-housing. As I highlighted earlier, we've seen trends change in operation models. Hybrid models have doubled in 20 for advertisers, and there's been a drop in in-housing. What's driven this change? Ed, I want to come to you first with this question.
Sure. I mean, I'd characterize that as a major U-turn, right? From 2019 to 2020, based on the results of the report, like a halving in brands that were professing to pursue an in-housing strategy. And I want to think about how we define in-housing. Is it taking an ownership over technology contracts, from the brand side, or is it actually investing in an entire programmatic execution unit within your business? And I think sometimes those two things have been conflated. There's, perhaps the surge in interest in housing was indicative of, trust issues, perhaps on the brand side. But while we've seen some successes, I think also maybe brands have dipped their toe into the pool there and realized that it's perhaps it can be challenging to source the right talent. It can be challenging to properly execute this. So I'm really interested to see that this trend is actually reversing. Perhaps they lifted the hood, and they saw underneath, and they got the transparency they were after. But maybe they've learned that there are experts in the market that they can lean on from an execution standpoint, and that's potentially behind this trend.
Thank you, Ed. Nicola, I'd love to hear your point of view on this.
Yes, I think I would expand on that further. I think talent is at the heart of the changes in the operational models. So I know that your slides from the front of the presentation showed that it has become year on year slightly easier, but when you look at the kind of all the barriers, hiring and training talent still remain the largest barriers for programmatic adoption. So I think talent is really important. Programmatic has grown quickly. It is a competitive marketplace for the best talent. And I think maybe some advertisers have found this through either their research or their direct experiences. And I think they're looking at different ways to work with agencies. I think from a kind of operational perspective, programmatic is quite complex. It moves very quickly. Speaking for the team that I work with, we have quite a broad kind of skill set of people to really drive innovation. And kind of we do lots of things that I think people don't really kind of, when you look at it on the surface, I don't think you really realise that all of these kind of activities go on. So we work quite closely with partners to inform like product roadmaps, thought leadership, building out innovation, new products to drive good results. And I think those are some of the things that I think it's probably harder to replicate within client teams.
Thank you, Nicola. Danny?
Yeah, I'd agree with both Nicola and Ed, but I've always been surprised, to be honest, at the amount of brands that would fully in-house. Programmatic's really bloody hard, and it takes a lot of intelligence in the space, a lot of domain expertise to really do it well. I think the value of agencies has been seen throughout the past couple of years. If you look at the amount of things you need to understand in the landscape at this point across cookieless, new channels that are addressable, how different markets work, like it's very hard to be able to fully in-house that and do it well. So I think as time goes on, as we sort of continue in a world where it's very difficult to be able to execute everything you want to be able to do in a single DSP due to walled gardens, it's going to be, it'll be even harder for an in-housing approach that makes sense. So I can understand why the contractual piece would be appealing. but actually taking the reins of the activity from an activation, analytics, and an optimization point of view is a different thing.
Thank you very much. And Vincent, I'm going to come to you last on this question.
Sure. I mean, definitely what we've seen is really the advent of the hybrid model. And it's normal, it's always a balance thing. Again, like my fellow panelists mentioned, it was more about around the trust issue, why everybody wanted to do it. I want to do it myself and I want to save cost. I mean, to be honest, saving cost shouldn't have never been the reason why you really want to in-house. There is many reasons, but this shouldn't be the big one. But I understand why, it was the big thing brands were saying, all right, now I can access the inventory through a DSP, hire, a team. And we've mentioned the expertise, which is really, really hard to hire the right people. So that's in itself already a huge issue. So, and I really think that it really highlights the value of media agencies and as we mentioned, how complex it is to run a trading desk, really, and all the best practices you can share by working in different verticals, and the landscape is changing so fast. So, and we've seen that, with app developers, MoPub is doing 100% in-app only. So we have both brands and traditional advertisers as well as app developers, and they went on the same trend, signing a contract and trying to do everything themselves. And it's usually, keep in mind, app developers are usually even leaner kind of team. It's really, really small user acquisition team. So again, hybrid model is the way to go. You have the best of both worlds. You own the contract, you own your campaign data, your media activation data as a brand, but you're not in charge of doing everything in terms of operation and planning. And that's again why media agency definitely help brands dramatically.
Thank you, Vince. It'd be really interesting to track this data in next year's Tours Programmatic Survey and see if this trend continues. I agree. Topic to meaty topic, and each one could be an entire panel. And we're now looking at the barriers to programmatic investment. And we said in the report that advertisers focus on gaining greater control of inventory, doing it to lower cost, and it's not supply chain transparency concerns, seeing the significant increase over the last year of from 38% to concerned about supply chain transparency too. So what can be done at supply path and encourage more transparency and efficiency? That's okay.
Yeah, so I think we've kind of constantly talked about transparency in programmatic kind of since the very start. And obviously The Guardian and Rubicon highlighted this a couple of years ago. And then again, at the start of this year, PwC and ISBA highlighted again when they claimed that 15% of programmatic revenue just disappears, which terrified our industry, I think. And so it's really highlighted that, and it's continued to kind of highlight that massive issue. I'm actually sitting on the Transparency Task Force at the moment off the back of the PwC and ISBA study, where at the moment we're actually focusing on standardizing taxonomy across the programmatic industry. Something that seems really simple, but actually is quite complicated. So for instance, two main ad tech platforms, the DSP and the SSP, they could both have a different way of doing dates. So for instance, if you've got a campaign, one of the dates might be an American date, the other might be a UK date. And already it makes it impossible to track the campaign throughout the whole supply chain. And so it's things like this that I know the IAB is also working on the task force with us, to basically make sure that, for instance, the date, even the time, so the time, is it going into seconds, milliseconds, things like that, so we can easily track it. It seems like a fairly basic task, but I think there's many challenges to kind of ensure like exactly what we're standardizing. So obviously we could be standardizing every single aspect of the supply chain, and that would just take too long. So what should we be prioritizing? But also like looking at transparency in terms of actually what's going to be beneficial for everyone. So there's kind of certain elements of the task force where people want a lot more data than is really necessary. And I think it's important to find that balance. We've had great discussions on whether publishers should be sharing their like pricing floors, exactly how much money they make. And that's not the purpose of the project. The purpose is to basically find this 15% discrepancy. So we've got a long way to go.
Thank you, Emily. Nicola, I'd like to come to you next.
So I think I'm going to talk about, I think, 3 just simple points that I think we can do from a buy side. So I think firstly, I'd recommend that everybody looks at their supply path optimization strategy, use the technologies available and lean into things like ads.txt. The IAB has a great guide on it, so please read it. The second would be build relationships with the partners that you're buying media from. Encourage them to lean into their kind of initiatives like sellers.json. And then I think the third one is, I think as an industry, we all should be leaning into these initiatives like Emily's just spoken about. I think we do have a long way to go, and I think we all just need to continue to support those efforts.
Really good. IAB Europe's website. Ed, I'm going to come to you next with regards to this question.
Well, I actually, there's actually already been a huge amount of work put into the topic of building trust and transparency in programmatic. Some of these initiatives are not that new now, right? And still, relatively new, but evolving and getting enhanced. And so I'd say that we're at a point where there is increased trust in programmatic, and that's contributing to the growth that we've been talking about. But to echo, I guess what kind of Nick touching on, you got your tech lab initiatives. They're really focused on authentication, just umbrella term, and under which you could put as TXT, sellers.json. They're looking at expanding that into the CTV environment. So as more formats come in, they will fall under these sorts of initiatives. Seeing in the UK as well the launch of the gold standard, which is a great initiative. It's about ensuring all of the certified parties have a certain level of implementation around things like the TCF and the other kind of tech lab initiatives, and we are seeing buyers lean in to get an understanding of that information. But obviously, as an intermediary, it's important that each constituent in the chain is aware and on board with the sharing of that information, and we're definite proponents of it. So.
Thank you very much, Ed. And Danny.
Yeah, I think the ISBA PwC report was a really good study to highlight the challenge here. The bit that it didn't highlight enough for me personally was the limitations of our industry, thanks to contracts that sit between platforms. So, as a marketer, if I have a contract with a DSP, I should be able to see all costs and data downstream of that, regardless of where it goes from that point. And there's limitations in how platforms are able or do tend to contract with each other and share data. So we can, shoot for the stars with ID solutions and common solutions, but the fact is we could very easily solve this if we could come to an agreement between many of the larger platforms and those that sit downstream of that from a supply point of view to fix this. I just hope to, Emily's point, that we don't go too far from a complexity point of view before we get that piece solved.
I agree. And finally, last but not least, again, Vincent, on this question, please.
Yes, it's definitely the SPO, supply path has been top of mind for a lot of folks in the industry, obviously brands, agencies, and the supply vendors that I represent today. So I think it's really about understanding the value chain and working with specialists. So I know it's kind of a seems like a good idea to work with very, very few partners that can do everything. But I mean, at MoPub, we only do in-app, and let me tell you that it's already a lot on our plate to be on top of our game just for this very specific, job. And we really want to do our best to support all industry standards. And yeah, as my fellow panelists mentioned, it's definitely the way to go. Programmatic is about scale and standardization. And the IAB Tech Lab is doing an amazing job trying to, having everybody in the value chain working on the same language and the same standards. So, for instance, at MoPub, we've just announced the public availability of OM SDK. And this is definitely not trivial. I mean, we are bringing to the table 1.5 billion smartphones that are now measurable. So that's a big step forward for the industry, knowing, app consumption is now bigger than TV and desktop. So we are all going in the right direction, and working with the right partners is definitely something we are seeing across the board, and is a big improvement in the transparency topic.
Thank you, Vincent, and congratulations on the open measurement support there as well. That's really important.
Thank you.
I want to come on to market trends and spend a couple of minutes here, because obviously this was a EMEA-wide survey, but do all these concerns and trends impact all markets in the EU, or are there market differences? So what are the drivers as well that cause the differences by market in the EU? So working pan-regionally here, are you seeing this in the market with regards to these trends?
So we're seeing a massive difference. I think also the pandemic has almost highlighted it even further this year. We've really seen a massive correlation with countries that have responded well to the pandemic and those that have responded not so well. So I know it's not in Europe, but Middle East for us has been enormous this year. They've kind of obviously handled the pandemic very well there. The Nordics, again, they're like Sweden's very famous for not having any lockdown this year, and they haven't really been affected by that. It's areas in, obviously we don't run in the UK, so I can't talk about the UK, but in kind of France, in especially like Italy at the start of the year, we were massively impacted. Germany has been like doing quite well. I think they're always kind of a market first, and so they kind of respond well to a lot of things. So definitely there. And then I think obviously the industries as well, like luxury, travel, are kind of the main industries we've seen that have had a massive challenge this year as well. But I think across the board, that's quite similar to, like, usually the biggest markets for us are like the big five in Europe. South Africa's a massive market for us. It's enormously increasing year on year. It's kind of the hub of Africa for programmatic, followed by Nigeria. And so, yeah, so we're definitely seeing a lot of change. And as Daniel mentioned, actually, like the CE region as well has really taken off over the last 12 months. We've seen a massive increase there and a lot more conversations happening. So yeah, big differences, I think, across every country.
Thank you, Emily. And Daniel, are you seeing similar trends or differences to trends by market as well?
Yeah, I think we've always taken a sort of hyper-local approach to Europe. It's impossible not to. The markets just look so different. Just the market dynamics and the makeup of those markets from a supply and demand point of view differs wildly. The UK has always been a sort of direct response driven market by nature of the optionality that marketers and agencies have with regards to supply and how consumers behave. Very different to Germany and the Nordics or certain Norwegian markets where the supply landscape is a makeup of a few publishers that have a very large presence in market, or sales houses in the case of Germany. And therefore, the way that you have to sort of enter these markets is very different. Then you add the complexity of, interpretations of GDPR and legislation, which again differs by market and makes it very difficult to take a sort of one size or one track approach to market entry. So, we have always taken a market by market approach, and I think that's been the same for a lot of industry experts, and I think talks to potentially why some of those brands may have decided to not go fully in-house over the past couple of years, where with all of these rollouts of regulation and new nuances by market, it's very hard to just sit here from a global approach and say, okay, well, we've got everything we need to be able to deploy a global campaign, because it just takes so much, intelligence internally.
Yeah, really good point. And I think Daniel's attitude towards programmatic report goes and see different trends as well, and reasons why, the things that you outlined there, Danny, we need to take a different approach by market as well. We're going into what the future growth areas are. We've only got a few minutes left, so we're going to go through it all 5 minutes left for this question. We're going to launch a poll as well to get the audience's point of view. That should be appearing on your screen as we're going through this question, as you can see there. But we're going to kind of focus on CTV, audio, and digital out of home. But the rapid growth areas, of CTV have been identified by likes of Adweek, which showed how usage remained high even in COVID-19 restrictions eased. And that's a very good thing, given that the growth expectations placed on it from advertisers 70% and agencies 60%, and ad tech providers as well 46% from publishers too, was flagged in this report. So there's a massive increase across the board from our 2019 data. What are the future growth areas though for you, each of you actually? So Danny, I'm going to come straight back to you here.
Okay. Yeah, I think Daniel talked about the sort of sophistication and innovation that's come out of Europe from a programmatic point of view at the start of this session, and that's absolutely the case. We are more advanced from a programmatic point of view in Europe than anywhere in the world, but from a CTV point of view, I'd say we're a couple of years behind the US on that front. So that, if you just watch TV in the US, it's a completely different experience to what we're used to here. I think the CTV has gone crazy for everybody in Europe over the past 18 months. Certainly in our business, it's our largest growth channel. And that and audio, will have seen significant upside with the pandemic. Growth channels will be dictated by consumer behavior ultimately, and what landscapes of supply look like on a per market basis. So it's not a surprise to me that the CTV has gone this way. I think there's more progression in the US in terms of cord cutting, which we're starting to see across Europe as well. So it's consumer behavior like that will start to dictate what the future of programmatic will look like from a growth point of view.
Thank you very much, Danny. Ed.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't able to vote in the poll, unfortunately. I tried to click, but it didn't let me. I was going for CTV as well, which, for us is a huge area of investment, a huge area of growth, absolutely sped up by the pandemic in terms of consumption. I think the promise of the device is that it will marry together a high impact big screen format with digital data. And, I think we're still working through those solutions and trying to bring that promise to life. We did a study at SpotX this year to try to understand from a consumer standpoint, who are these new audiences? The kind of key message that came out of that is, perhaps intuitively for some people, you might think younger demographics skew heavily towards CTV, and actually there's a universal appeal across demographics and consumer audiences for CTV. So it's going to continue to grow. Yes, it's kind of exploded. There's certainly a lot of hype in the market. I think the broadcaster platforms have been seeing from their kind of OTT services a growth in CTV that's been gradually building over the last few years. But what then I think has also changed most recently is that you have a complementary set of AVOD supported CTV streaming services that have arrived with meaningful scale. So guys like, Rakuten and Pluto and Samsung and all of those sorts of businesses are presenting a really interesting opportunity in CTV, and one that we're going to hear more about, no doubt.
No doubt, for sure. Emily.
I completely agree. And I think another thing from a publisher's point of view is data for us. So first party data collection, like how we go about obviously collecting that data after kind of third party cookies disappear off Chrome. I think it's also something else that's really important is kind of the awareness of our data collection for our readers as well. I think The Social Dilemma, the Netflix documentary, really highlighted the fact that we obviously use data, but people don't really understand what it's for. And I think that's so important to kind of make aware to our readers that we do use their data, but we use it in a good way, and we use it in a responsible way. And then the final kind of point around data is compliance as well. So we're only going to get tighter in terms of compliance across the world, and yeah, we've got a lot more kind of compliance coming out. So I think those are kind of the 3 data points that are definitely going to impact the future.
Thank you, Emily. Nicola?
I'm going to go very quickly because I've just seen the time. So I think I agree, CTV audio will continue to grow 100%. What I think is really interesting, and I don't think we've touched on it very much here, is how programmatic actually enables you to bring kind of creativity and AI to these formats and do so in a really engaging and I think future thinking kind of way. And I think that's going to be kind of really important for advertisers as they move into the future.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for flagging the time. Vincent, very quickly, we'll have to make you the last one here.
Sure. I mean, for me, in marketing, you always go back to the consumer behavior. And we've seen that, this year where people were at home, they were just staying at home. So you could think, the desktop usage will increase. It was actually the opposite. So I really think, it's not really the new shiny thing, when you talk about CTV and OTT, but really mobile is the sleeping giant. I was just here listening to the eMarketer podcast this morning talking about Netflix, new net subscribers, paid subscribers this year. And it's actually rising like crazy. And it's like, you're having water, internet, and your Netflix subscription. And again, as a consumer, you're looking at this on your smartphone, on your traditional TV, or on your PlayStation app, hub, make no difference. So mobile video, for me, it's really what's going to drive a lot of next year growth. So that's really, for me, one of the massive trend when you talk about video, as a whole.
I love the alternative perspective there, Vincent. Thank you very much for that. And look, we're going to have to end this panel here, but can I just, if you have future confidence in programmatic, please give me a thumbs up, panelists. Awesome, thank you very much. Look, thank you all for your time. Appreciate it. And I know there were a number of things, and we will get round to audience questions as well after this. We'll make sure we'll wrap them up and send them through. But thank you for an incredible panel discussion. Your insight into the European programmatic language, there needs to be resilience shown in the industry, and coupled with the future growth predictions, makes for a very exciting 2021. Keyword, cookies. And I know a number of you have data, so this next panel will be the landscape beyond the third-party cookie. And I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for this session, Sarah Vincent. And apologies for delivering you the moderator mic a little bit late. I was poor in my timekeeping in the last one. Again, to everyone else, don't forget to submit your cues to the panel using the Q&A box located at the bottom of the Zoom. Over to you. I think we're waiting for just Sarah to panel as a panelist. Okay, it looks like we're having a couple of challenges here. If you wouldn't mind giving us a check. And while in the panel as well, I think we've got, it looks like we've got nearly everybody else. I don't mind stepping in right now, just while we're waiting for Sarah to join. As always, technical issues. I just asked Sarah to raise her virtual hand, but while we're waiting for Sarah to join the session to be the moderator, be on the panel to introduce themselves, if that's okay.
Yep, maybe I should go first then.
That'll be amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So hi, everyone. I'm Akshay Bhattacharjee, and I'm the Programmatic Solution Specialist at IAS. And I'm a panelist today for the hot topic of programmatic advertising beyond third-party cookies.
I'm Tom Kershaw. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Magnite. Hi, everybody.
Hi there, my name is Ben Hancock. I am Head of Programmatic Trading at CNN International.
Hi, I'm Jacob Beck. I'm co-founder at Adform.
Fantastic, thank you all.
Hi, I'm no worries at all. Hi, I'm Victor Zawadzki from Media Math. I'm the General Manager for APAC and EMEA.
And I'm very pleased to say, Sarah, you're now on. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, David, for stepping in. I've been like eagerly waiting to join, but yeah, technical issues, as we say. So thank you for stepping in. Thank you for the introductions panel. It's great to see you here today. Just for intro on my side, I'm Sarah Vincent. I head up the strategic partner development team at Index Exchange. And we're here today to talk about like life after the third-party cookie, what the world would look like. At Index, we've been focused on this for quite some time, but I'm keen today to share or listen to thoughts from the panelists as to how we got to this position we're in today, which is probably fair to say we're in quite a disruptive transition period, what the future looks like, the opportunities and challenges that are going to face us, and we'll end this time on a prediction on where we see ourselves this time next year. So without further ado, I will move on. Just quick housekeeping. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'd love to be able to include some audience questions into this time as well. And thank you. So Ben, I'll start with you. How have we got ourselves into this position that we're in today?
Yeah, hi, thanks Sarah. So I think this is part of a much wider narrative. So what we saw with cookies is they were really game-changing technology. And they really revolutionized audience targeting. But I think that led to overabuse and to overuse and abuse by bad actors in what is a small amount of bad actors in what is a quite complex and opaque ecosystem. I think the answer to a lot of solutions were seen as more data, more attribution, more measurement. And I think ultimately this led to what we saw a couple of years ago as a bit of a consumer backlash over privacy and use of data. I think the industry could have done more to make that value exchange more explicit. And ultimately what we're seeing now is that legislation is catching up with the ethics. So I think this is, like I said, I think that this is part of a wider narrative. And I don't think that we should be particularly surprised with hindsight that this is where we are. And I think it's just important to make the point that it's only actually third-party cookies that are going away. So publishers can obviously still retain first-party cookies, and we can do everything that we could before within our within our own sites.
Thanks for that. So that's one element of it. Do you also feel that there's been an impetus to look at life outside third-party cookie and bring more authentication due to moving ad spends across
walled gardens that we've seen perhaps in the last couple of years, really. Do you think that also factors into where we are today?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's happened is this has created a real incentive for the markets, for publishers and for advertisers to refocus their resources onto really fixing those solutions. And again, that, like I said, with that spend shifting over, that's a really big important part of it as well.
Thank you. Akshay, do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to add a couple of points from my side as well, that consumers now, they understand that their data is more valuable than gold, and that's what is actually fueling this entire online advertising industry, right? Furthermore, because of some events in the past that had data privacy scandals with consumers are now, let's say, much more aware of how their data is being tracked, and that it's not just social media networks which are able to get this data. There are also third-party, let's say, players which are able to get their consumer data, which are actually able to get the consumer data and also maybe sell it. So when we look at GDPR, CCPA, this has really been, let's say, a step in the right direction for the consumers. But the fact still remains that, do we have regulators who can, strictly or more aggressively enforce these regulations? And how do, let's say, ad tech companies also respond to this? We've seen, for example, IAS had a consumer data privacy study recently. This was, I think, so back in April or May this year. And we understood that 94% of UK consumers care more about their data, and they were, let's say, open to not having to be targeted by these ads. So 6 out of 10 consumers are willing to receive less targeted ads as opposed to sharing this personal information. So are we going to see this proper balance between consumer privacy and ad relevancy for the advertisers? This is something that the industry needs to understand, and this is where I think we are also progressing towards.
Cool, that makes sense. So user first, which is absolutely the end game here. Jacob, what do you see as some of the key opportunities and challenges in making our way towards this user first, privacy first ecosystem?
Well, it just started raining crazy here, so there might be a challenge with the sound, but I hope you can hear me despite the rain.
You're good for now.
Okay, great. So I think there are plenty of challenges and opportunities here. I think one of the bigger ones that we've been running into is, of course, aligning on industry standards and obviously through organizations like IAB or Prebid. But I think there's been really good progress lately, and Tom might touch on it. I mean, especially the PubCom ID, I think it's a really good example of a future-proof and both GDPR and user-friendly ID. That being said, of course, I mean, I think one of the challenges is that that's not going to be the only ones, right? There are already lots of national solutions like NetID, etc., company-owned IDs, which might not be the best way to sort of avoiding mistakes. And we have been part of the problem too. I mean, the first implementations we've done with publishers on first-party IDs, I mean, we came up with our own standards because there wasn't any at that. So I think aligning on the standards is definitely, both an opportunity and a challenge. I have to also say, I mean, down the line, I do see a challenge in, the broadcasting of user emails through RTB. I mean, that does make me nervous on the long term in terms of, incidents, PR headwind for the industry, et cetera, or maybe regulatory intervention, et cetera. Also, personally, as a consumer, I mean, I can definitely see, an issue in that. So that's also a challenge I see in the long term.
Tom, do you agree with that?
Well, absolutely. I think Jacob nailed it. The most important thing here is collaboration and standards. We've had too much balkanization and everyone kind of going their own direction, and we have a limited amount of time to come up with a standardized approach for how we use identifiers, and also how we explain the internet to users. I think that's the most important thing. I mean, in 10 years, the whole structure of the digital economy has exploded and changed, but there's never been a renewed dialogue to the user to explain the trade-offs that you have. You can consume content with your wallet, you consume content with your time. those are the options. And I think that those choices are good choices. And it's good that consumers have the choice. They can choose to see ads, they can choose to pay with money, but we haven't explained how that works. And I think the only way we can explain the internet is if we do it together in a consistent way. So I think these standards and collaborative efforts are super critical.
Yeah, I see. Thanks, Tom. Victor, you're nodding your head there. Do you have anything else to add on this from your side?
Maybe just like even strengthening the point to see, like there's been a Jones Media study this year which says 80% of all visitors come from the free or go into the free independent internet outside of walled gardens. When you look at advertising spend across the internet, it's exactly the opposite. Like 70% of spend goes into walled gardens, and that's one point. When we see that in an even bigger context, and we look across the biggest challenge or the priority to make the internet consumer first or customer first, then all of a sudden we look into not only how friendly advertising is, we see advertising that consumers love, but we as well look into market power and how it's changing, right? And let's say everybody will remember from their own studies, like monopolies and oligopolies are never good for consumers and never good for advertisers in our case, right? And looking across the board here, and every faces, like we are representing in the end the free and independent ones. And as you just mentioned, Jacob and Tom, like the collaboration between is even more important right now than it used to be before. And as well, like from an advertising standpoint, relying on companies spending advertising money who are completely vertically integrated across media or demand side, supply side, measurement, content, and so on, and being a black box is something which cannot be good for customers as well, not for the outcome of advertisers' marketing actually. But looking across a fragmented, maybe now harder to navigate ecosystem, but which is aligned and independent and aligned especially with interests of advertisers and aligned with the real outcomes, not only outcomes which you see in online reports, is something which we need to get to. And I think that's the big challenge. And Tom, to fully agree like that, the window of opportunity and timing is not going to be endless, right? So it's really on us right now to get together and as well speed up for the good of the consumers.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on something there around accountability, auditability. If these two phrases are not the most overused terms by the teams that are actually collaborating to create these solutions, they should be. I think that we've learned, there's definitely some mistakes we've done in the past that we can learn from here. So that all makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Akshay, what about, from your point of view, what do you see as some of the key components of the future cookieless, third-party cookieless world?
Yeah, so Sarah, it always comes back to the consumer, right? Out here, we are trying to understand what kind of transparency the consumer wants. So they need to understand how the data is being collected, where is it being stored, and how is it actually being used. So we need to, again, like I said, we need to have this balance between consumer data privacy and also have ad relevancy when we're talking towards brands and advertising. A potential outcome that we actually see is in this cookieless world is how marketers can actually turn back towards contextual targeting, right? It's also performance-based, and the basic idea, the concept of contextual targeting is to make sure that the context is relevant, of course, and it's in the right environment. And that really does not depend on the cookie data from the user. Another important aspect is that contextual targeting is an easy way or a more meaningful way for the marketer to actually continue delivering relevant ads at scale, and also have a meaningful connection with the users without any sort of cookie, without any sort of dependency on the cookies. Nowadays, we've seen contextual targeting also move beyond the old ways of just like, keywords or content on the page to something which is more, let's say, revolutionized, which is, for example, targeting based on ads which are having sentiment or emotions, the placement of the ads, time of day. There are several other factors. And what I think what has happened in the last, let's say, few years is that we've evolved from content being king to context being the new king, right? A simple example is that, let's say if I'm an auto company, automobile provider. So for me, I would want to show up against articles which are relevant towards automobile or any sort of car related articles. But with the evolution, I can take control of the context that I show up against and make sure that, you know, I'm not showing up against articles which might be related to automobile pollution or any sort of callbacks of auto. So I'm protecting myself while also taking care that, you know, it's helping the publisher. It's also not invading the privacy of the consumers. And in fact, tying ads to the environment can actually create more meaningful insights for, or let's say the bond between the advertiser and the consumer will definitely get stronger. And IAS also had a recent study where we understood that 37% or more of the consumers found ads to be really helpful when they were contextually relevant in the surrounding content. So the better the semantic technology used out here, or the intelligence technology that's being used out here, marketers can minimize their wastage. They can definitely maintain their efficiency and also safeguard their budgets.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. What I'm keen to understand is that, you know, how big a piece of the puzzle is contextual going to be? Like, how much will it actually solve for? Ben, from your point of view as a publisher, have you seen the evolution of contextual that Akshay has just mentioned, actually bringing you this increased revenue and benefiting from that? And how big a part do you see that playing in the future? Or do you have other strategies that you're employing now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Akshay made some really good points there on contextual and how this technology has really evolved. I think it'd be good to give everyone a bit of idea about what we've done at CNN International to put this into context. So we've recently relaunched our audience first strategy, and that really puts audiences at the heart of every campaign instead of focusing on platforms or geography. And to implement that, we've built our own technology, and this really shifts emphasis from brand safety to brand suitability. So it's more about where brands do want to be rather than where they don't. And really, that focus is about putting brands in the right places, meaning that brands align their messages with topics that are more desirable. And we built two tools to be able to do that. So the first one is SAM, which is the sentiment analysis moderator. And that analyzes context and nuance using neurolinguistic AI. And the second is CEP, the Contextual Engagement Platform. So that's about content classification. So as well as using the IAB taxonomy, it also includes human involvement into classifying content as well. And I think what this has demonstrated is that context and how publishers approach context has really evolved in recent years. And the fact third parties cookies are going away really creates a really strong incentive for publishers to get behind that, to invest in it. Like I said, it's technology that Warner Media's built working with CNN International. And this creates a much more nuanced, much more effective way for brands to engage with our content and our audience. So yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be a really big part of how we solve these problems.
Okay, thanks. So contextual's one, first-party data, publisher first-party data, audience segments another. Victor, what's your view from the buy side?
So like adding on that and couldn't agree more. What we look at from a little hopefully bigger context is to say like how can we look at the ecosystem to be more addressable. You said it, probably the most overused word very soon. Accountable as well, to see like who's adding which part of the value to campaigns, and aligned as well, right? So the vision, and this is something we made the core of our strategy at MediaMath, to create an ecosystem which makes it possible for the advertiser to understand the whole supply chain, including the financials, but not only that, but as well the impact. If you want to think of an example to say like, what if, Ben, you could basically see what an advertiser puts into as goals, puts into as budgets, and puts into as well like other metrics into a DSP like ours, and then would be able to optimize against those metrics across the whole supply chain, maybe via Magnite, who can then as well like put all the functions and possibilities to adjust and to optimize against that. So you really have an aligned ecosystem with all transparency across SSPs like a Netform and the Magnite, and come to a much more effective advertising and media optimization that we are right now. Identity, which is something which is across, or needs to be across the whole supply chain, and something which we believe at least like to be 15%, which ISBA has basically lost, to be found in there in the future at least.
That's interesting. Tom, what do you think about that? Obviously, you mentioned about Magnite working with MediaMath in this respect.
I totally agree with that, but I do think that we as an industry are overtraining on two concepts when we talk about identity. The first thing we're overtraining on is targeting. Targeting is important, but attribution is more important. And there's not enough discussion in the industry around what attribution models and how we'll be able to demonstrate to advertisers what their dollars did. That has to be the front and center in this conversation. Targeting, I'm pretty comfortable we can figure out. Attribution needs a lot more discussion. The other thing that we're overtraining on is browsers. None of us are using browsers right now. We're all in an app. And that is more and more what people will be doing when they consume the digital economy. And we talk about cookies. IDFAs and mobile identifiers are going away before cookies go away. That's going to happen next year. There never was a stable identifier in CTV or for CTV devices. So what we need to think about is the relationship between digital content and users across all media types. And we need to come up with solutions that will work and be common across those, because the use of web browsers is not the growing and interesting part of the internet economy. It's CTV, it's apps, and it's all these new things, whether it's out of home or audio or smart speakers. That's where we have to go as an industry, instead of training on something that was super relevant a few years ago, but less so now. So we need to think about attribution, and we need to think about cross-device.
I think that's a really good point, and you know, this obviously will affect across all environments. And we do focus a lot, and a lot of conversation has been focused on, you know, Chrome deprecating the cookie in 2022. Now, I actually read yesterday that might be pushed a bit because of, you know, there doesn't seem to be that much development or progress being made today. And so it's a really important point not to get too focused on the browser side. As you said, like, we are seeing users in many other environments, expedited by this year by this really unusual, unprecedented year. But it's beyond that, and it's back to that bigger picture view about people think of this as there's a deadline next year, but it's not next year, it's now is when we actually need to be talking about it, and all together. Jacob, do you have any final points on this question?
No, I mean, it's hard to disagree with any of it. I just want to say, from a technical perspective, I mean, I'm an engineer, and when I look at third-party cookies, I have no doubt that, you know, first-party IDs is the replacement, and I think we can see evidence of that now, where we are starting to get close to 10% when we look into the bit stream of such IDs being then set instead. And to the discussion around browsers, I mean, they apply to all environments. So I really think that is what we will see as the way forward, and I think it will benefit large quality publishers like CNN, because their IDs, their first-party IDs, will be worth a lot more than, you know, a long-tail publisher, etc.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got a big audience today, and they're made up of everyone's clients that are on this panel today. So what is the one thing that you are telling your clients or your partners today? Like, what is your line of narrative around, you know, as we transition to this new world? Like, what is the one piece of advice that you would like your clients and partners to take away and act upon today? Tom, do you want to kick off with that?
Sure. My one piece of advice is do something. I think we spend too much time on panels talking about stuff that's not super relevant, and we don't spend enough time putting production stuff out there and making it work. So if anyone, whether you're a publisher, a buyer, or a platform, if you're not experimenting with first-party identifiers, to Jacob's point, if you're not starting to do real work around first-party data and segment creation, If you're not figuring out how to talk to your users about how the internet works, the clock is ticking. We cannot continue to analysis paralysis ourselves here. We have to start developing the new internet. It's going to be fun. It's going to be challenging, but I urge everyone to act and start contributing.
Act now, Victor.
Yeah, that's actually what I plan to say. So the other thing is, it's fine. The other thing is, I think it's probably as important as well. Like, think in phases, right? So like jumping in the cookieless world right now will not replace what we have right now. If you plan in terms of doing a proof of concept right now with a solution and then jumping into the next one and the next one and scaling it across the next year and the year after, that's the only way to be successful. Like, keep the reach and keep the accuracy and as well proof point of marketing spend. That's something which requires a lot of I think mental change, or say mentality change and flexibility. But as well, like, it's gonna be a lot of fun, challenging. I think as well, I strongly believe in a strong market change or market structure change in the next couple of years. So a lot of opportunity out there.
Thank you. Akshay?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, so from IAS's perspective, we are proactively working to ensure that we are able to continue to support all our clients through these times of change. And we encourage all our clients to actually join in, help shape the new ad ecosystem. And the best way to do it, like Tom mentioned, is like to do something, voice your opinions, make sure your voice is actually heard, do the testing. And we are also telling our publishers and advertisers, try to protect the first party data, but also make use of your first party data to maximize it, right? And the only way, like one of the ways that you can actually do it is through the contextual solutions that IAS is offering. You can focus on the contextual part of it, and then like also make sure you're broadening the investments for your first party data, and it's aligned to the advertiser side, so there is a proper a proper match between the publisher and the advertiser. And that's not only with brand safety, but actually the brand suitability part, because we're not trying to only focus on avoiding content, right? That's not the actual goal. The goal is to positively, or to make sure that we're contextually targeting good content out there, which helps the publishers, but also helps the advertisers and keeping the consumers, safe. That's my take on it.
Ben, do you agree with that? Do you have anything else to add from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So I think again, as we've always said with programmatic, we're going through a time of a lot of change. It kind of feels like there's more change now. I certainly think that third-party cookies and these identity questions are going to accelerate a lot of that change. My key message really to our clients though is that please work with us directly, as opposed to buying us or trying to buy premium publishers right across huge chunks of the web. There are, of course, other challenges in the industry that we haven't talked about, but a lot of it we can solve. It kind of goes away when we've got those one-to-one relationships between buyers and sellers. Through programmatic guaranteed, through PMPs, they're a more trusted, more transparent environment. We can offer bespoke, curated solutions, and we can better use our first-party data, and we can better use those tools that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this getting closer with publisher and buyer makes a huge ton of sense. And I've actually heard of some examples of instances where that collaboration's happened, the closeness has been brought together, and there has been like purchases and transactions end to end without using the third-party cookie. So I see that kind of these are the helping us make those first steps towards proving the case for the ability to buy without the third-party cookie. Victor, I think we discussed before like an instance where you were working with Super Awesome. Was that a similar scenario there that you would?
It's yes and no, right? I think that's an interesting one. It's the context of that is a challenge where we see like the last thing everybody wants is to manipulate kids actually and advertise to children on one hand, right? So like dangerous when you're an advertiser and you have kids products. There's a lot of regulations around it. Maybe something which we might see as well, like being requirements for in the future for for all advertising, but maybe not. Like let's see how good of a job we can do. The context here is to say, like, how can we utilize partnerships in getting to the next phase of identity, and as well, like in terms of scaling and looking into cookieless future, right? And Super Awesome is one partner of ours who provide quite a innovative solution, say like how to be legally compliant, how to be as well like ethic compliant, and advertise kids products to future consumers, right? So again, like on one hand, a very critical thing to do it right, but on the other hand as well, like something which they developed, and which we're working together closely to say, be safe on the privacy side, which is a big challenge on one hand, strip off every identifier you could think of. On the other hand as well, like make 100% sure with a manual check that any advertising which is showed, including product, including message, is done as well, so that advertisers and clients of ours, like the Mattels of the world, of other, can provide or can advertise their products without running into any legal and as well like any ethical any ethic challenges.
Excellent, thank you, Victor. I see David's appeared. I feel like, oh, gonna get told off in a second. Do we have 30 seconds left, David?
30 seconds. Yes, take 30 seconds. Helen will turn off, but take 30 seconds, please.
Cool. So just to wrap up, I'm sorry, Jacob, but I just would like to hear your answer on what you're telling your clients today. Like, what piece of advice are you giving them, which you'd like them to be acting on?
Well, basically everything Tom said, except for not being on panels. I'm sorry, I'm not living up to that one. But I mean, we are telling them to get started, and that a lot of publishers and advertisers think they have to choose some sort of ID solution. But I mean, it is a multi-ID world that we're going to go into. And so just getting started with the IDs that are already out there from quite a few publishers is what we advise them. Start some test campaigns, start learning. I mean, it's better sooner than later.
Yeah, amazing, thank you. And that's coming through loud and clear from the panel. It's act now, collaborate now, start testing, and don't wait for the one solution that will dominate. There will be multiple solutions. So start testing. Thank you so much for your time today. It's great to hear from you. David, I see there's some questions here, so perhaps we can follow up with those afterwards. Yeah.
Absolutely. Our goal to all the audience is to take your questions, get some answers to them, and share them with everybody who joined today's Virtual Programmatic Day. So watch this space. But really great panel. Thank you very much, Sarah, and all panelists. A really good discussion and with some really good advice as well. Before we move on, we'd love to get your thoughts on the depletion of third-party cookies and what it means for programmatic buying. So please, obviously appeared on your screen. Whilst you complete the poll, I just want to go back to the approach this new post third-party cookie era. We have to keep talking and working together as an industry. It will all be about testing, learning, and adapting. At IAB Europe, its core focus for the work plan is this, and are currently working on the update for the post third-party cookie era guide that we released in spring. Within the update, there will be shared status on the latest industry and corporate solutions. We also have a dedicated post third-party cookie task force, which meets bi-weekly. So if you'd like to join or take part in other initiatives for IAB Europe, please do get in touch. The results should be in a second, but as we wait for these results to pop up, oh, here you go. So the biggest concern, some decrease in programmatics. So few concerned about large decrease, and many hoping for no change at all, which is great to see. Now let's move on to our next panel, which explores another critical topic for the industry, the Transparency and Consent Framework, aka TCF. Version 2, the latest version, continues to support the overall drive of the TCF to increase consumer transparency, choice, management by digital properties of consent and compliance, and industry collaboration that centers on standardization. To discuss the latest version, its adoption and evolution, I'd like to welcome Townsend Feehan, the IAB Europe CEO, who will introduce her panel. Please submit your cues for the panelists as well in the Q&A box, as always. Over to you, Townie.
Hi, David. Thanks so much. Can you guys hear me fine? I will assume
clear.
so.
Yes.
So it's really exciting to be joining the event. I think the previous discussion was a nice kind of a nice segue. A lot of evocation of privacy. TCF is obviously part of our pitch as an industry to ensure that users' interests are protected and the law is complied with. And so backed by popular demand, we have the Virtual Programmatic Day TCF update panel, and my all-star panelists start with Stephanie Hansen, not Sarah Hansen, as whose name mysteriously appeared on the previous slide. So Stephanie Hansen is offering manager at OneTrust. I then have Alex Cohn, Senior Director, Product Management, IAB Tech Lab. Alex had to get up early this morning. Looks as if he's in the dark, but maybe not in New York, probably. And then Thomas Mandrina, our much loved chair of our TCF steering group and Senior Director, Publisher Central Europe at Xandr. So I'm just gonna, we don't have much time, and I don't know if Helen will be wanting to even yank some of our existing 20 minutes because things are running behind a little bit. But the point was just to kind of take the temperature on how you guys see the early weeks and months of the V2 rollout going, and get some feedback from the market, and even maybe thoughts about how where the TCF ought to evolve next going forward. I did want to start with an update on just a couple numbers on uptake. So we have, as of today, 636 registered vendors on V2, and almost all of those, so 619 of those are actually operational. So a little margin of 16, 17 still to become operational, but that's a very strong number, 150 roughly more than we had on V1. We have over 120 validated CMPs, and we believe that the TCF is implemented on probably close to 500,000 websites, and TCF strings are turning up in around 80% of bid requests emanating from the GDPR jurisdiction. So, significant uptake, and kind of an exciting time amidst all the complexity of implementing the new version. So I thought I'd just start with feedback from publishers, from Thomas and Stephanie. Maybe how do you guys see the publisher reaction to V2 in all its glory and all its complexity? Maybe start with Thomas. What's the word on the street or amongst your publisher network?
Well, I would say relief. They are relieved that it worked properly, that we had this steep increase in numbers of vendors, and that also, despite all the challenges that we see with in-app and AMP, the revenue and the data looks actually pretty good. So it's not that it was a huge drop. It's going okay. So it's a relief. They're happy as it is. And we see in our platform, we see 0.3% of V1 strings. So V1 more or less disappeared, and the V2 is there, and everyone is just adding the last pieces. And yeah, they are happy that the revenue more or less remained stable for the publisher. I'm not sure, Stephanie, what about your feedback?
Yeah, I would echo that for sure, and just add that I think we've entered a new phase. We went through the upgrade from version 1 to version 2 phase, which can always be a little manic and stressful. And I'm happy to say that I think that phase is a little behind us, and now we've entered almost more of an optimization phase. So, how are my vendors respecting the signal? How can I maybe optimize and start to think more about less about the get it done and more about the do it well. So I think that's what we're starting to see now.
Well, that's certainly, yeah, those are both positive. Relief is nice. in a moment where there is much stress on many fronts, and nice to see a move to refinement. It's also interesting to think about the ultimate beneficiaries of the framework in a way, who are consumers. I wonder if any of you, even Alex, sort of watching at a high level, over how the whole industry implements the framework. Does anyone have a sense of consumer awareness, or how the different consumer improvements in V2 are hitting and maybe impacting? So just to recall a couple of obvious things we did for consumers in V2 were these more, we had user-friendly language alongside the legal language. And we had a little bit more granular control. So I guess like roughly twice as many purposes. So to give users kind of that much more sense of control, discriminating control, but partly on request of the DPAs who looked at V1 and felt it could have been a little bit more, the control could have been a little bit more specific. So would anyone venture any speculation on how the ultimate users out there are seeing V2, or is that, are we too remote from that to say?
So from my perspective, it's very difficult for the user to understand what's going on. I mean, there's very complex. The industry is brutally chaotic and complex. We all know that. How can we explain this to users in a way that they understand that it's still some way to go, and they also still need to learn to take over the control that they have. So at the moment, it seems like they still read it as a banner. They say, okay, that's it. But they can go in and refine if necessary. They can select if necessary, but still as a development process. I think they are at the beginning, and we need to give them some time in order to learn how it's done. I'm not sure, Alex or Stephanie, how you see that.
I haven't seen any data, so it would be pure speculation. But I agree with the things that Thomas has said. Ultimately, our point of view at Tech Lab, and I think it's shared by a lot of people, is the more that, you mentioned the number of sites and the number of bid requests that carry the string, like the more people see the same sort of experience, particular to privacy, like this maybe isn't true for every product out there, but particularly to privacy and data protection, I think that over time, at least, the predictable nature of like what to expect should go up, and that's the hope, because I think a lot of what fuels the even the changes in regulations that there already are is like this sense that like it's sort of like there's transparency theater or something like that, and that there's just I have to make different choices in my phone, in my laptop, in my Wi-Fi device, in my, all on various apps. Like, I think the more that there's consistency, I'm hopeful. But again, it's speculation. I haven't seen any research on, how users are responding. But the theory, at least our hypothesis, that we're setting our vision against is like consistency will help.
Yeah, I agree. And the only thing I would add there, Tony, is, similar to what Thomas said, the vehicle by which it's delivered is very similar to what consumers are used to seeing. So we appreciate and understand the nuance of when TCF is in play versus not. But I don't think consumers really pick up on that difference. And to them, right now, a banner is a banner is a banner. And I think great points from Alex on, kind of meeting them in their world of their devices and how they function, as opposed to very siloed across each different publisher.
Makes good sense. Here's another question, and maybe a little bit early to say, and it may induce like waves of nausea even to think about it. But I wonder if any of you has an idea, like a secret a secret aspiration or thought about what a next evolution of the TCF, what features one might want to put into to V3, small things, big things, both based on kind of, the feedback you've gotten on V1 and V2. We couldn't jam everything into V2. Obviously, we had to like just draw a line at a certain point, and we had like a little roster of things we were going to come back to anyway. But yeah, any ideas on how the continual work of iterating on it might usefully be channeled over the next few months. Maybe start with Thomas again, because he's running the steering group, and that's where a lot of those conversations end up anyway.
Well, at the moment we see a lot of optimization of V2. That's what Stephanie mentioned. So it's more like getting it on the ground, getting really the nuances and all the niche use cases. Thinking about TCF 3 or 4 or 5, it's like really looking into the future, and that's, I mean, everything around identity, but that's more what Alex is into it. So he looks more into the future than we do actually. In the business, we do the operational tasks to optimize V2, and then we see what Alex comes up with and see the idea that the tech lab comes up with.
How about you, Stephanie? Anything you didn't get in V2 that you'd like to come back to kind of sooner rather than later?
Oh goodness, Tony, I just feel like there's so much changing around the whole landscape that we almost can't make decisions on our own in this silo. I feel like we're almost being so reactive right now to everything that's going on, and so not to get too philosophical, but to be more proactive. And I think there's a lot of good things going on, but I wouldn't say that there's an opportunity to really say, here's our punch list and we're going to go down this path, because I think there's just too much that we can't ignore right now.
Yeah, Thomas' indication that I have some sort of crystal ball is generous, but inaccurate. So this is wearing both the hat that I have now at Tech Lab and then previously as a product manager, like working in the industry. Like, I think we need to reinforce what we have, in the sense that we've built, I think, a really good kind of compromise across the commercial interests that are there in V2. We've got a good foundation now, and V1, we needed it to get out the door, but now we've got a good foundation. So it's like, what are the things that make TCF even stronger? I think it's like integrity around the supply chain interacting with it. So, you mentioned, I think somebody mentioned earlier, maybe it was in the earlier panel, looking into what, maybe it was Stephanie, like what vendors are actually doing with the data, with the string, like, are they respecting it? I think that, if I had to pick one thing to do, it actually would be that. And I realize that that's not a front end sort of item for an end user, but I think it translates that allows us actually to tell a more credible story as we go to market. That look, we have this signaling mechanism that meets a lot of use cases, and also it's something that you can actually truly trust is going to work. That it's going to be respected, and if it's not, then people, there's real enforcement and penalty. And I know you guys are already working against that, and you've got a lot of work going on at IAB Europe to make that happen. So it's not like it doesn't exist today. I think it's more just can we shore up what we have in a way that we're really proud to go to market with it, and really proud to sit with TPAs, sit with users and journalists and say, this is you can actually trust this thing.
Maybe I would like to add one point that I would like to see, not in TCF 2.0, 3.0, but more in Europe, that we have a more aligned interpretation in different countries. So we still see that it's not as chaotic as it used to be some years ago, but still the DPAs sometimes have very different requirements. and they not always talk to each other, which means as a vendor and as a publisher, maybe you need to rely 5 different interpretations, which is very difficult, as everyone can imagine. That's nothing I wish for the TCF 2.0 or 3.0, but it's more like that are something that I wish for the European digital landscape.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to have a whole panel on enforcement. I think you're right. There definitely is convergence happening, and not every DPA is going to pick up digital advertising as an industry and issue policy guidance. And there's got to be some kind of sanity and division of labor amongst the DPAs, and some leaders who are going to, around whose vision others are going to converge. And it definitely is happening to a degree, but we have suffered a little bit from the the sort of cliche in Brussels that GDPR was a regulation written in the language of a directive, and directives are kind of like, well, here's your objective, and how you get there is entirely your own business, to the member states, and that gets like really messy in combination with fines of 4% of global annual turnover and stuff.
Totally agree. One aspect, even from Germany, we have federal states, which means if you're maybe based in Munich, you're better off or worse off compared to if you're based in Hamburg, which is for companies more like a real difficulty if they have subsidiaries in a different federal state. So it's getting very complex if you go into the details.
And also, depending on where you sit in the ecosystem, it's like more or less relevant to you what a local interpretation may be, and publishers may be more fixated on the neighborhood or the regional or national interpretation, and so that makes it more complex for all of us. So we evoked a little bit in passing already the fluidity of the landscape. The previous panel was talking a lot about the deprecation of third-party cookies. Someone has already mentioned here, one of you guys has mentioned identifiers. I'd be interested to hear any insight or thoughts anyone had to share about the kind of articulation of TCF and these changes. So what do these changes, what does the deprecation of third-party cookies, for example, what are the impacts of that we can see on the TCF, and how would you see TCF evolving? Does it remain relevant in this fluid landscape? Who'd like to take, maybe Stephanie first?
Sure. Yeah, I think TCF absolutely remains relevant in this conversation, Tony. I think we are going to see a split of consumers who are comfortable having an identity built up about them, and other consumers that end up in more of a disconnected environment where they're not receiving things that are more targeted to them, and maybe end up in more of that contextual landscape. But I do think identifiers are going to be key here, and we go back to some points that Tom made probably on the last panel around the fact that no one really knows or understands how things work today from a consumer perspective. And I think there's a massive opportunity here to educate. We've been communicating, like I said, through the same vehicle of pop-ups and messages. I think we can maybe take some lessons from even potentially how things went with CCPA out of the US and this do not sell information. People were very worked up ahead of CCPA about consumers are not going to know or understand what this means. How do we educate folks? Where can we put that education? And I think we're in that same opportunity right now. And we only see these really important pivots, every now and then. So I think we can try to learn as much as possible as we iterate. And I think TCF is going to be key here, while we still are needing to capture consent from folks, right? I think there's a question that popped up in the Q&A specific to app tracking transparency and IDFA and things like that. And the reality is the technical changes in the landscape, they don't fully encompass the needs of the privacy regulations. And so things really have to come together. It's not enough to say, I've solved the technical challenge and I've ignored the privacy landscape. So I think we still have the need to disclose information. We still have the need to capture granular consent. And so to me, it doesn't make sense to throw away what we've worked so hard to come out with and standardize. It's more so, how can we take that and adapt and maybe adjust for the technical changes, but certainly march forward with that. So hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Alex, I think REARC is like trying to juggle all these balls to accommodate everyone's.
We are. I might not even speak as a fanboy of that. It's more of a, like, if you think about how the digital economy works today, the changes in the platforms are proposing or already implemented don't mean that advertisers aren't still coming to those platforms and saying, I want to activate my data across its scale. And activating data is everything from frequency capping to recency control to targeting to measurement and attribution. So the idea that somehow we'll get to this post personal data like world is it flies in the face of how much the market capitalization of Google and the highest growth area of Amazon, and like it's not, the personal data isn't is something that advertisers are basing their buys on, is not going away. The question is like where, like who will have access to that? So I think one of the things I'm thinking about is, and I see, sitting in W3C, is the privacy engineers like think that they've got a great idea in like everything on device, and then they start realizing, well, we have to bring some of it off onto our servers, but we've got controls for that, right? Like we've got, you can make a choice, and it's like, well, you can make a proprietary choice for it. So like maybe the way that we should start thinking about this is how do we actually, with the framework that we have, engage the platforms to say, look, we could standardize the way that you're still needing to allow choice, right? Because it's not that personal data has gone away. It's that you're saying that other companies can't be trusted with it, but you're still needing to be. So like at a bare minimum, like we could have standardization across the platform. So I think, even if the world comes to, it doesn't make sense to have it on every single publisher site, which I don't think we're there yet. It's like, standards still make sense at the platform level, and so I think there's a place for standards in transparency and control for consumers, regardless of where it's implemented, right?
That makes good sense. In this changing landscape, there's obviously increasing focus on privacy and data protection, and from a legislator point of view, so like increasingly pressure to do something. Probably not as much awareness amongst regulators of the technology changes that we see. I'd be interested to hear all of your views, maybe on the degree to which you see any kind of convergence, even beyond the German DPAs and EU DPAs, to like the world, across the globe. We know we have a evangelical, regulator out there, spreading the news and proselytizing the approach taken in the GDPR. But I'd be interested to know how each of you sees the global landscape changing from a policy and regulatory point of view. And who wants to go first? Maybe Thomas?
Well, that's a very open and future thinking question. So what we see, at least, that TCF is very strong in the European market, and we also see that outside of that, it can be a role model for other countries and for other regions, which is great, because we spend a lot of time and effort and thought into it. So we believe it's good enough in order to use it somewhere else in the world, and hopefully, ideally, it will be a framework that can be a basic framework for a global approach, because it's flexible. It can be used everywhere. But that's maybe, Alex, you will you can add into that from a more technical perspective?
Yeah, I mean, technically, we're wanting to use, you know, a lot of the thought that went into the technical aspects of TCF for supporting other jurisdictions, regardless of whether the policy looks exactly the same or not. I actually do think it's super important to have local organizations like engaged with local policymakers. So like, I think there's going, like, that doesn't have to mean that there's fragmentation for users as much as it just means that there are like local ambassadors to whatever the policy is that's, you know, built on top of the technical framework. Yeah, but outside of that, like, I think, you know, regulators are sort of chasing one another right now. And I think, you know, it's interesting to watch the US for sure, because I think, you know, not because we're credible anymore, we're kind of becoming a banana republic, but like there's at least a sense that like, hey, we need to do something. And if they're like anyone else, like the something tends to like at least read the GDPR, because unlike the CCPA, it was written over 7 years or plus, as opposed to 7 days, like Alistair's CCPA. So like, I think GDPR will like influence a lot of what's coming, and in other locations, just because it's hard to start from scratch, right? And like, if somebody's already done something generally kind of well, like you tend to want to borrow someone else's homework.
I see David looming, but I want to really hear from Stephanie, because I know OneTrust do have this global. You guys really do have a global overview, and it's, you know, core part of your business. What do you see?
We do, Tony, and you know, honestly, right now it's a bit of a whack-a-mole, and so we build technology that allows people to play whack-a-mole and say, I got to do something different in all of these different places. So, you know, it's a real challenge for sure. I think we may see things ultimately boil down to, here's what I'm doing in an opt-out world, and here's what I'm doing in an opt-in world. I don't know that you want to even converge more than that, because at the same time, you know, you're operating a business and you're optimizing for that as well. And then if you look at user behavior and trends, some users don't want to engage. And so I don't know that we want to go to a world where we force everyone to engage. If we're transparent and we give them the option to engage, I don't know that we need to put that barrier there. So to me, that would be the ultimate, is like, if we can come to a convergence where it's, here's your opt-in standard, here's your opt-out standard, and you still have some choice, some risk analysis as a business, and some flexibility, but maybe not quite as much fragmentation as, you know, as we see right now.
Thanks a lot. That's good. That's good paradigm. I think we're all about to be whacked off the stage by David. Do we have any more time, or are we history?
Unfortunately, we're going to have to jump on to the next one, but an amazing panel. Thank you very much, Alex,
Thanks
Thomas,
so much, all you guys.
Stephanie and Tanya. Really appreciate it. Cheers.
Okay.
And we'd love to have you back on the next VPT for sure.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Now, and we welcome back Daniel Knapp, Chief Economist of IAB Europe. Daniel will lead the next panel of experts in a discussion to explore data management, best practices, and for SSPs to increase transparency and trust and solve unnecessary trading and information sharing complexities within the ecosystem. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, David. And if you look at the title of this panel, Data Best Practices, that sounds daunting, that sounds technical, but actually it's not quite. So let me give you a bit of context on this panel, because you might not have heard this title in a programmatic panel before. We have in the industry and in this conference already spoken a lot about things like supply chain transparency, SPO, and in particular in the first panel of how programmatic is more than just buying and selling, and how the infrastructure can and should be used for different things. We've also heard about attribution and other things. And we have to bear in mind that this year, in 2020, is a very special year, where we've seen the ad revenues of many publishers drop. We're seeing an increased concentration on the one hand, but also fragmentation on the other hand, which makes the financing of publishers of premium content increasingly challenging. And we are in digital advertising, not in any old industry. Advertising is a key pillar in supporting the third estate. We are supporting premium publishers. We are supporting that public opinion can be shaped in a transparent and non-partisan way. So advertising is incredibly important for that. And we want to figure out where there's been a lot of attention on the buy side, on custom bidders, on SPO, how publishers, more than just selling their inventory through programmatic, can really reap the benefits of data, and how working with their SSPs, they can kind of maximize the control of programmatic and shape the future. And with that, I want to welcome my wonderful set of panelists. I hope you are all on. I cannot see you right now. So we got Mark Bausinger from DoubleVerify, Isabella Widawska from Yieldbird, Shane Shevlin, IP on Web, and Jacqueline Boyaki from PubMatic as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. And just to get started, let's just do a lay of the land here. We've seen initially programmatic consists of about 70% of all kind of digital display, broadly ad revenues, but it remains very, very complex in Europe. From a publisher perspective, why is that? Why is it so complex? Why do these transparency issues persist? If you could briefly introduce yourselves and frame this question for us all. Thank you very much. Maybe we start with you, Shane.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Shane from IP on Web. So a great opening question, Daniel. And I think, you know, there's probably a trade-off that needs to be made when we talk about sort of programmatic trading as opposed to trading inside, for example, walled gardens. You know, avoid the complexity of open standards, you know, or get better transparency, I think. And broadly, the complexity that I'm talking about stems from the fact that, you know, the open web, you know, programmatic trading on the open web, it is complex because of how programmatic has evolved, and it's complex because of the fragmented nature of the supply that you're trying to reach, the desired audience that advertisers want to reach on the open web. And I think the distinction here is that, you know, walled gardens will often sort of showcase their simplicity in reaching, you know, these desired audiences, whereas, you know, transparency, their definition of transparency is very much, you know, or frequently self-defined, as it were. And so, you know, broadly, I think, you know, if you want to trade on open standards, it's going to be complex. Open standards, on the other hand, afford you the tools with which you can guarantee the transparency that, you know, our industry so badly needs.
Thanks, Shane. Mark, Isabella, Jacqueline, what do you think about this? Why is it so complex for publishers today?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Isabella Widawska, and I'm senior analyst in Yieldbird from publisher side. From my point of view, I think looking at the beginning of programmatic advertising, we can see that there could be impression there is lack of transparency. But I think that nowadays there is market is changing so much that we see that transparency is getting better and better. For example, by adding TXT to publishers' websites, so we have more. We can prevent fraud from demand vendors. Moreover, we also last year's first prize in Google. I think also a big step in transparency in pricing for publishers. Also, things like end of third-party cookies. I think it's also can be seen as a big step to better transparency for publishers, for users, because users will know where the data are going to. But from complexity point of view and publisher point of view, I think programmatic is complex because when we, for example, looking from a small publisher, who work with only open market on Google AdSense, for them programmatic is seen as simple one, but working with bigger publishers, big media group, we see that complexity is visible for our publishers because they have very different sections which have to be taken care of. For example, not only open market, but also direct sales, different demand partners. You have to have good, very big knowledge about programmatic, how to set things to work flawlessly, to work together to bring more revenue for publishers. So I think this complexity is visible, but I think our market, advertising market is evolving so much. So we have companies, for example, like ours, like Lilbert, where we trying to help our publishers to understand programmatic. So we can educate them and make it more easier for them.
And Jacqueline, from a PubMatic point of view, do you see similar challenges across all your publishers? Is that across the board, or do you see strong variations by market, by type of publisher?
Yeah, I think what's made it hard for publishers is that I think as an industry we've been pretty siloed, and I think we've had to evolve. There's always different levels of challenges that I think publishers are hit with. Year on year, we had GDPR. We've now enforced ads.txt. There's now apps.txt as well. Supply chain object, sellers.json, and all of these good initiatives. I think that IAB has really helped us kind of bring in that kind of cohesion. I think, and I think that was what was missing. And I think by having those kind of standardizations, that has helped us work together a lot more and actually help to solve the challenges that a lot of the publishers have today when working in programmatic, because everybody would be siloed and working in a different way. So I do think the transparency piece, whilst it's a challenge, I do think it's getting better. I do think we're evolving to making sure that we can try and work together to solve for a better open internet. So yeah, I think those are the areas, and I think those standards have to continue. I think it's always hard to work out who should lead this, and I think it's been good to see the IAB step in and say, look, these are the kind of standards that we need to kind of adhere to, and I think all of those kind of things has made it a bit more seamless. So whilst there has been challenges in programmatic, I do think it's got better.
Mark, and I'm in particular interested to hear from you, because you are not an SSP, but you can stand kind of on top of that. Now with header bidding, we're in a situation where publishers need to manage not one or two, but maybe half a dozen or even more SSPs at the same time. So what are the challenges here in kind of integrating this and kind of weaving all this together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great point around the increase in partner diversification that we've seen over the last couple of years for publishers. And I think that's actually really an effect of kind of the nature of programmatic, right? Programmatic at its core is a marketplace, similar, almost akin to like a stock exchange. There are